The morning mist clung to the ancient peaks of the Blue Ridge Mountains as 42-year-old James Jimmy Crawford shouldered his worn hunting pack and checked his Winchester rifle one final time. It was November 15th, 1995, the opening day of deer season in Virginia's Shenandoah National Park, and Jimmy had been looking forward to this hunt for months. As a third-generation resident of the small mountain town of Luray, he knew these woods like the lines on his weathered hands, having first learned to track deer alongside his grandfather when he was barely tall enough to see over the tall grass in the meadows. Jimmy worked as a mechanic at Thompson's Auto Repair, the only full-service garage in Luray, a town of 3,800 people nestled in the Shenandoah Valley. His colleagues described him as reliable, methodical, and safety-conscious, traits that had served him well both in his profession and during his 25 years of hunting in the Virginia mountains. He was married to his high school sweetheart, Patricia, and they had 2 teenage children, 16-year-old Sarah and 14-year-old Michael. The family lived in a modest 2-story house on Elm Street, where Jimmy had built an impressive workshop in the basement where he restored antique firearms and taught his son the fundamentals of gunsmithing. Hunting wasn't just a hobby for Jimmy Crawford. It was a family tradition that connected him to his roots and provided meat for the family table throughout the winter months. His grandfather, Thomas Crawford, had been a legendary tracker in the region, known for his ability to find deer even in the most challenging conditions. His father, Robert Crawford, had continued the tradition, teaching Jimmy not just how to hunt, but how to respect the forest and understand the delicate balance between human needs and wildlife conservation. Patricia had initially been skeptical about hunting when she and Jimmy first started dating, but she had come to appreciate both the skill it required and the way it connected her husband to his family history. She knew that Jimmy's annual solo hunting trips were as much about solitude and reflection as they were about bringing home venison. These expeditions gave him time to think through problems, plan for the future, and maintain his connection to the natural world that had shaped his character. Jimmy's hunting preparations were always meticulous. He spent weeks scouting locations, studying weather patterns, and ensuring his equipment was in perfect condition. His hunting pack contained everything he might need for a 3-day expedition: a high-quality sleeping bag rated for below-freezing temperatures, a reliable camp stove, enough food for 4 days in case of unexpected delays, first aid supplies, emergency signaling devices, and detailed topographic maps of the area. He carried a compass and had recently purchased one of the new GPS units, though he rarely relied on technology over his own knowledge of the terrain. If you enjoy real mysteries like this one, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any cases. On the evening of November 14th, Jimmy had dinner with his family at their favorite restaurant, Miller's Diner on Main Street. The waitress, Helen Rodriguez, later remembered the family seeming relaxed and happy, with Jimmy telling stories about previous hunting expeditions and explaining to his children the importance of conservation and ethical hunting practices. He mentioned his plan to explore a remote section of the Appalachian Trail where he had seen promising deer sign during a scouting trip the previous month. Jimmy's destination was a rugged area approximately 12 miles southeast of Luray, where the Appalachian Trail crossed through some of the most remote wilderness in Shenandoah National Park. The region was characterized by steep ridges, dense forests, and numerous small valleys that provided excellent deer habitat. It was also an area that saw relatively few hikers, especially during hunting season, making it ideal for someone seeking solitude and abundant wildlife. The plan was straightforward. Jimmy would park at a designated trailhead, hike approximately 6 miles along a combination of established trails and old logging roads to reach his preferred hunting area, set up a base camp, and spend 3 days hunting before returning home on November 18th. He had made similar trips dozens of times over the years, and Patricia wasn't concerned about his safety. Jimmy always carried emergency communication equipment and had promised to call home each evening using his new cellular phone, though service in the mountains was unreliable at best. On the morning of November 15th, Jimmy left home at 4:30, driving his Ford pickup truck to the Thornton Gap trailhead. The parking area log showed that his vehicle arrived at 5:45 a.m., and he signed the trail register indicating his planned route and expected return date. This would be the last official record of his presence anywhere. The weather forecast was favorable: clear skies, temperatures in the low 40s during the day, and dropping to the upper 20s at night, with no precipitation expected. Jimmy's truck was noticed by several other hunters throughout the day, but this wasn't unusual during opening week of deer season, the trailhead parking area typically filled with vehicles belonging to hunters, hikers, and other outdoor enthusiasts. Park rangers conducted routine patrols, but didn't observe anything suspicious or concerning about Jimmy's presence or equipment. When Jimmy failed to call home that evening, Patricia initially wasn't worried. Cellular service in the mountains was notoriously unreliable, and Jimmy had warned her that he might not be able to call every night as planned. However, when she hadn't heard from him by the evening of November 16th, and especially when he failed to return home as scheduled on November 18th, she contacted the Page County Sheriff's Office. The initial response was measured but thorough. Sheriff's Deputy Mark Sullivan, who handled most missing person cases in the county, was familiar with Jimmy and knew him to be an experienced woodsman who wouldn't take unnecessary risks. However, Sullivan also understood that even experienced outdoorsmen could encounter unexpected problems: equipment failures, medical emergencies, falls, or disorientation due to sudden weather changes. A preliminary search was organized for November 19th, involving sheriff's deputies, park rangers, and several local volunteers who knew Jimmy personally. The search began at the Thornton Gap trailhead, where Jimmy's truck was found exactly as he had left it, with no signs of disturbance or hasty departure. His spare keys were hidden in their usual location, and a note on the dashboard confirmed his planned route and return date. Search dogs were brought in on the second day and successfully picked up Jimmy's scent along the established trail for approximately 4 miles, before losing it in an area where multiple paths intersected. The dogs seemed confused at this location, circling repeatedly and showing signs of agitation that their handlers interpreted as evidence of conflicting or disrupted scent trails. The search area encompassed approximately 50 square miles of rugged mountain terrain, including sections of the Appalachian Trail, numerous side trails, old logging roads, and vast areas of dense forest. The terrain was challenging even for experienced searchers, with steep slopes, thick undergrowth, and numerous ravines and hollows where someone could easily become lost or injured. Several potential clues emerged during the first week of searching. A piece of camouflage fabric was found caught on a tree branch approximately 5 miles from the trailhead, in an area slightly off the main trail system. The fabric appeared to match the pattern of Jimmy's hunting jacket, though definitive identification was impossible without more extensive forensic analysis that wasn't available to rural law enforcement in 1995. More significantly, searchers discovered what appeared to be a hastily abandoned campsite in a small clearing approximately 7 miles from where Jimmy had parked his truck. The site contained the remains of a campfire that appeared to be several days old, scattered food packaging, and disturbed ground that suggested someone had left quickly without properly cleaning up. However, none of the items found at the site could be definitively linked to Jimmy, and the discovery raised as many questions as it answered. The organized search continued for 10 days, involving over 60 volunteers at its peak, including members of local hunting clubs, hiking organizations, and search and rescue teams from neighboring counties. Helicopters were used to survey areas that were inaccessible to ground teams, though the dense forest canopy limited the effectiveness of aerial searches. The effort covered every trail, road, and known shelter within a 15-mile radius of Jimmy's planned route. On November 29th, the active search was officially suspended due to approaching winter weather and the exhaustion of available resources. Sheriff Sullivan assured the Crawford family that the case would remain open and that any new information would trigger renewed search efforts. The decision was difficult but necessary, given the vast area involved and the realistic limitations of what volunteer searchers could accomplish in increasingly dangerous conditions. The Crawford family refused to accept that Jimmy had simply vanished without a trace. Patricia, who had never been involved in outdoor activities before her husband's disappearance, taught herself to read topographic maps and began organizing private search efforts with the help of Jimmy's hunting friends and fellow mechanics from Thompson's Auto Repair. These searches continued sporadically throughout the winter and spring of 1996, focusing on areas that the official search had been unable to cover thoroughly. Jimmy's brother, David Crawford, who lived in Richmond and worked as a private investigator, took leave from his job to coordinate search efforts and investigate leads that law enforcement couldn't pursue due to resource limitations. David had served in the Army and had experience with tracking and survival techniques, making him particularly valuable in the search effort. He spent weeks interviewing other hunters who had been in the area during the time of Jimmy's disappearance, trying to piece together a timeline of events and identify anyone who might have seen or interacted with his brother. The investigation revealed several disturbing details that hadn't emerged during the initial search. Multiple hunters reported hearing gunshots in the area where Jimmy was believed to be hunting, but this wasn't unusual during deer season and hadn't been considered significant at the time. However, 2 hunters specifically remembered hearing what sounded like rapid-fire shooting, more like target practice or a confrontation than typical hunting shots, sometime during the late afternoon of November 15th. More troubling was the discovery that the area where Jimmy had planned to hunt was known to be used by illegal marijuana growers who took advantage of the remote location and dense forest cover to cultivate their crops. Local law enforcement was aware of this activity but had limited resources to patrol such vast wilderness areas effectively. The possibility that Jimmy had accidentally encountered drug operations added a criminal dimension to what had initially been treated as a missing person case. David Crawford's investigation also uncovered reports of suspicious activity in the region during the weeks leading up to Jimmy's disappearance. A local store owner reported selling large quantities of camping supplies to several men who didn't appear to be typical hunters or hikers. The men had paid cash, avoided providing identification, and had asked detailed questions about access roads and trails in the area where Jimmy later disappeared. The psychological impact on the Crawford family was severe and long-lasting. Patricia struggled with depression and anxiety, finding it difficult to maintain her job as a school secretary while dealing with the uncertainty about her husband's fate. The children, Sarah and Michael, dealt with their father's disappearance in different ways. Sarah threw herself into her studies and became increasingly withdrawn, while Michael began acting out at school and showing signs of anger and rebellion that worried his mother and teachers. Sleep became elusive for Patricia, who found herself lying awake at night imagining worst-case scenarios about what might have happened to Jimmy. She developed a compulsive need to check local news reports and police scanners, hoping for any information that might provide clues about her husband's whereabouts. The sound of helicopters would send her rushing outside, wondering if search teams had resumed looking for Jimmy. Sarah Crawford, who had been planning to attend college on an academic scholarship, found her grades slipping as she struggled to concentrate on schoolwork while worrying about her father. Her teachers at Page County High School noticed the change in her behavior and arranged for counseling, but Sarah remained largely uncommunicative about her feelings. She began spending hours in her father's workshop, touching his tools and reading his hunting magazines as a way of feeling connected to him. Michael's response was more outwardly disruptive. The 14-year-old began getting into fights at school, challenging authority figures, and experimenting with alcohol obtained from older students. His grades plummeted, and he was suspended multiple times for disciplinary infractions. School counselors recognized that his behavior was a reaction to trauma, but their resources for helping troubled students were limited in the small rural district. The family's financial situation became increasingly difficult as months passed without resolution. Jimmy had been the primary breadwinner, earning approximately $35,000 annually at Thompson's Auto Repair, a substantial income for the rural area, but barely sufficient to cover the family's mortgage, car payments, and other expenses. Patricia's part-time salary as a school secretary provided only about $12,000 per year, forcing the family to rely on savings and assistance from relatives. The costs associated with the search efforts compounded their financial stress. Private investigators charged substantial fees, and the family felt obligated to contribute to search and rescue operations even when they couldn't afford to do so. Patricia took on additional cleaning jobs in the evenings and weekends, often working until late at night to earn extra money for expenses related to finding Jimmy. Insurance complications added another layer of stress to the family's situation. Jimmy's life insurance policy contained a standard clause requiring proof of death before benefits could be paid. Without a body or definitive evidence of death, the insurance company refused to process the claim, leaving the family without access to funds that might have eased their financial burden during this difficult period. Community support was substantial initially, with local churches, hunting clubs, and civic organizations organizing fundraisers and providing assistance to the Crawford family. The Luray Methodist Church, where the family had been active members, established a meal rotation to ensure Patricia and her children received regular hot dinners. Local businesses donated services and supplies, and several hunting groups contributed money towards search efforts. However, as the case dragged on without resolution, public attention gradually shifted to other concerns, leaving the family to cope with their loss largely on their own. Well-meaning friends and neighbors began avoiding the topic of Jimmy's disappearance, unsure how to offer comfort and worried about saying the wrong thing. This social isolation compounded the family's emotional distress and made them feel forgotten by their community. The holiday seasons were particularly difficult for the Crawford family. Thanksgiving and Christmas had always been important family celebrations, with Jimmy taking pride in providing venison for holiday meals and leading family traditions like cutting their own Christmas tree from the mountains. The first holiday season after his disappearance was marked by empty chairs, unanswered questions, and the painful awareness of his absence from every family gathering. Patricia found herself unable to pack away Jimmy's belongings, leaving his clothes in their shared closet and his personal items exactly where he had left them. His coffee cup remained in the kitchen cabinet, and his favorite chair in the living room stayed empty, even when the family had guests. These physical reminders provided both comfort and constant reminders of their loss. The first anniversary of Jimmy's disappearance was marked by a memorial service at Luray Methodist Church, where the Crawford family had been members for over 20 years. The service was well attended, demonstrating the impact that Jimmy had made on his community through his work, his involvement in local organizations, and his reputation as a helpful neighbor and skilled craftsman. Pastor Robert Miller, who had known the Crawford family for 15 years, delivered a sermon about maintaining faith during times of uncertainty and the importance of supporting community members through difficult periods. The service included readings from Jimmy's favorite Bible verses and hymns that he had enjoyed singing during Sunday worship services. The memorial service also served as a fundraising event for continued search efforts and to establish a scholarship fund in Jimmy's memory. Community members contributed over $8,000, which was used to hire additional private investigators and to provide financial assistance to other families dealing with missing person cases in rural Virginia. Over the following years, several theories emerged to explain Jimmy's disappearance. The most optimistic theory suggested that he had suffered an accident, perhaps a fall or medical emergency, in a location where his body hadn't been found by search teams. The vast wilderness areas of the Blue Ridge Mountains contained numerous ravines, caves, and dense thickets where someone could be concealed for years. Dr. Rebecca Johnson, an emergency medicine physician who consulted on the case, explained the various medical emergencies that could befall a solo hiker in remote terrain. Heart attacks, strokes, diabetic emergencies, or severe allergic reactions could incapacitate someone quickly, leaving them unable to signal for help or return to safety. Even experienced outdoorsmen could be vulnerable to sudden medical crises, especially in cold weather that placed additional stress on the cardiovascular system. A more troubling theory focused on the possibility that Jimmy had encountered illegal drug operations and had been killed to prevent him from reporting the activity to authorities. This theory gained credibility when law enforcement raids in 1997 and 1998 discovered several large marijuana cultivation sites in areas close to where Jimmy had disappeared. However, no direct evidence linking these operations to Jimmy's disappearance was ever found. Local law enforcement officer Detective Ray Thompson, who investigated several drug cases in the region during the 1990s, explained that marijuana growers often used remote forest areas specifically because they offered concealment from both law enforcement and potential thieves. These operations sometimes involved individuals willing to use violence to protect their illegal investments, and encounters between growers and innocent hikers had resulted in threats, assaults, and in rare cases, more serious crimes. Some investigators speculated that Jimmy might have been the victim of a hunting accident involving other hunters who had panicked and concealed the evidence rather than reporting the incident. Accidental shootings were not uncommon during hunting season, and the fear of legal consequences might have motivated someone to hide their involvement in Jimmy's death. Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries statistics from the 1990s showed that the state averaged 15 to 20 hunting accidents per year, with approximately half resulting in fatalities. Most accidents involved hunters who mistook other people for game animals, particularly in low-light conditions or dense forest areas where visibility was limited. The combination of excitement, adrenaline, and powerful weapons created inherently dangerous situations even among experienced hunters. The most disturbing theory suggested that Jimmy had been deliberately targeted by individuals who knew his hunting patterns and had planned his murder for reasons that remained unclear. This theory was supported by the careful nature of Jimmy's preparations and his familiarity with the area, making it unlikely that he would have made the kind of mistakes that typically led to hunting accidents or disappearances. Criminal profiler Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who reviewed the case files in 2004, noted several factors that suggested premeditation rather than spontaneous violence. Jimmy's careful preparation, his notification of family members about his plans, and his selection of a familiar hunting area indicated that he had been following established patterns that could have been observed and anticipated by someone planning to harm him. As technology advanced, new investigative techniques became available. GPS tracking and improved communication systems made it easier to coordinate search efforts and maintain contact with searchers in remote areas. Digital databases allowed investigators to cross-reference missing person cases and identify potential patterns or connections that might have been overlooked using traditional methods. In 2002, cadaver dogs with enhanced training were brought in to research areas that had been covered during the original investigation. These specialized animals could detect human remains that had been buried or concealed for years, even in challenging mountain conditions. The dogs showed interest in several locations, but excavation efforts failed to uncover any human remains or personal belongings. DNA analysis capabilities improved significantly during the early 2000s, offering hope that physical evidence from the crime scene might eventually provide answers. Hair samples, fabric fragments, and other materials collected during the original search were re-examined using more sophisticated techniques, but the results remained inconclusive. The Crawford family maintained pressure on law enforcement to keep the case active, regularly meeting with investigators and providing new information when it became available. Patricia Crawford became an advocate for families of missing persons, working with state legislators to improve search and rescue protocols and funding for rural law enforcement agencies. Cold case reviews were conducted periodically, with fresh investigators examining all available evidence and exploring new theories about what might have happened to Jimmy. These reviews often generated renewed media attention and occasionally produced new leads, though none ultimately led to breakthrough discoveries. In 2008, a significant development occurred when construction workers building a new section of highway discovered human remains in a wooded area approximately 20 miles from where Jimmy had disappeared. Initial reports suggested the remains might belong to Jimmy, generating intense media coverage and renewed hope for the Crawford family. However, forensic analysis revealed that the remains belonged to a different individual, a hiker who had disappeared in the early 1980s and whose case had also never been solved. While this discovery didn't help the Crawford case, it demonstrated how the wilderness could conceal evidence for decades and renewed interest in other unsolved disappearances in the region. The breakthrough that everyone had hoped for came on September 23, 2020, 25 years after Jimmy's disappearance, when an experienced thru hiker named Rebecca Martinez was exploring an unmarked trail approximately 10 miles from the original search area. Martinez, who was documenting wildlife for a graduate research project, noticed something unusual wedged between two large boulders in a remote ravine. What she had discovered was a heavily weathered backpack, partially concealed by decades of accumulated leaves and debris. The pack was badly deteriorated but still recognizable as hunting equipment rather than typical hiking gear. Most significantly, the pack showed what appeared to be multiple bullet holes, 3 distinct punctures that had clearly been made by high-velocity projectiles. Martinez immediately contacted park rangers, who secured the scene and called in forensic specialists. The backpack was carefully extracted and transported to the Virginia State Crime Laboratory for detailed analysis. Inside the pack, investigators found personal items that were eventually confirmed to belong to Jimmy Crawford: his hunting license, personal identification, and several items that family members recognized as belonging to him. The bullet holes in the backpack told a story of violence that transformed the case from a missing person investigation into a homicide inquiry. Ballistics experts determined that the holes had been made by rifle ammunition, likely from a high-powered hunting rifle similar to weapons commonly used in the area. The pattern of holes suggested that whoever had shot the backpack had been firing from relatively close range. More disturbing was the discovery of what appeared to be bloodstains on the inside of the backpack, despite 25 years of exposure to weather and wildlife. Advanced DNA testing confirmed that the blood belonged to Jimmy Crawford, providing the first definitive evidence of his fate and establishing that he had been the victim of violence rather than an accident or natural death. The location where the backpack was found was significant for several reasons. It was approximately 2 miles from the area where the organized search had focused, in terrain that was extremely difficult to access and unlikely to be discovered by casual hikers. The ravine was hidden from view and required technical climbing skills to reach safely, suggesting that whoever had disposed of the backpack had intimate knowledge of the local terrain. Forensic analysis of the backpack and its contents revealed additional evidence of the crime. Fabric tears consistent with knife cuts suggested that Jimmy's belongings had been searched, possibly for valuable items or identification. The selective removal of certain items, including Jimmy's wallet, cash, and expensive hunting knife, indicated that robbery might have been a motive for the attack. The discovery prompted a renewed investigation led by Virginia State Police cold case detectives with access to modern forensic techniques and databases that hadn't existed in 1995. The investigation team included specialists in ballistics, DNA analysis, and criminal profiling who brought new perspectives to the evidence. Digital mapping technology allowed investigators to create detailed models of the crime scene and surrounding area, helping them understand the sequence of events and identify potential escape routes used by the perpetrator. The analysis suggested that Jimmy had been attacked while hiking toward his planned hunting area, rather than at his campsite or while actually hunting. The renewed investigation also benefited from improved databases of criminal activity and missing person cases. Investigators were able to identify several similar crimes that had occurred in remote wilderness areas throughout Virginia and neighboring states during the 1990s, raising the possibility that Jimmy's murder was part of a pattern of violence targeting solo outdoor enthusiasts. Interviews with surviving witnesses and family members revealed new information that hadn't been available during the original investigation. Several people recalled suspicious activity in the area during the time of Jimmy's disappearance, including reports of individuals who didn't appear to be legitimate hunters or hikers, but had been seen in the vicinity. The case attracted renewed media attention, including coverage on national television programs that specialized in unsolved crimes. This publicity generated dozens of new tips from viewers, including several individuals who claimed to have information about drug operations in the area during the 1990s. One particularly promising lead came from a former participant in illegal marijuana cultivation, who contacted authorities through an attorney, claiming to have knowledge about Jimmy's death. The individual alleged that Jimmy had accidentally discovered a large grow operation and had been killed by individuals protecting their illegal business. However, efforts to verify this information and identify specific suspects proved challenging due to the passage of time and the reluctance of other potential witnesses to come forward. The Crawford family experienced mixed emotions about the discovery of Jimmy's backpack. While they were relieved to finally have confirmation of his fate and evidence that he had been the victim of a crime rather than an accident, the knowledge that he had been murdered was devastating. Patricia Crawford, now in her 60s, expressed both gratitude for the answers and anger that it had taken 25 years to learn the truth. The family's long ordeal had taken a significant toll on their relationships and individual well-being. Sarah Crawford had become a successful teacher, but struggled with trust issues and anxiety that she attributed to her father's disappearance. Michael Crawford had experienced problems with substance abuse and had served time in prison for drug-related offenses, challenges that his family believed were connected to the trauma of losing his father under such mysterious circumstances. The discovery of the backpack also raised questions about the adequacy of the original search effort. While the location where it was found was extremely remote and difficult to access, some family members wondered whether more extensive searches using different techniques might have uncovered the evidence sooner. These concerns led to discussions about improving search protocols and training for law enforcement agencies dealing with missing person cases in wilderness areas. The investigation remains active as of today, with Virginia State Police continuing to pursue leads and analyze evidence using the most advanced forensic techniques available. The case has become a priority for the Cold Case Unit, which has dedicated significant resources to identifying and prosecuting those responsible for Jimmy's murder. DNA evidence from the backpack has been entered into national databases, and investigators are hopeful that advances in genetic genealogy might eventually lead to identification of suspects. The technique, which has been successful in solving numerous cold cases in recent years, involves using DNA profiles to identify potential relatives of suspects through public genealogy databases. The Crawford family has established a reward fund for information leading to the arrest and conviction of those responsible for Jimmy's murder. The reward, which has grown to over $50,000 through community donations and fundraising efforts, represents the determination of family and friends to see justice served regardless of how much time has passed. Today, a memorial plaque at the Thornton Gap Trailhead honors Jimmy Crawford's memory and serves as a reminder of the dangers that can exist even in seemingly peaceful wilderness settings. The plaque also includes safety information for hikers and hunters, encouraging them to inform others of their plans and to report suspicious activity to authorities. The case has had a lasting impact on the local community and law enforcement practices in rural Virginia. Training programs for search and rescue personnel now include instruction on preserving potential crime scenes and recognizing evidence of violence. Communication protocols have been improved to ensure better coordination between local agencies and state-level resources during missing person investigations. Jimmy Crawford's story serves as a tragic reminder that evil can intrude even into the most beautiful and seemingly safe natural environments. His love for the mountains and respect for wildlife traditions cost him his life, but his family's determination to find answers has contributed to improvements in how similar cases are investigated and has brought attention to the ongoing dangers faced by outdoor enthusiasts in remote areas. The search for justice continues, driven by the hope that someone with knowledge of the crime will eventually come forward, and that advances in forensic science will provide the evidence needed to hold those responsible accountable for their actions. Until that day comes, Jimmy Crawford's family and friends remain committed to keeping his memory alive and ensuring that his case receives the attention and resources necessary to achieve resolution.